Thank you very much, Michelle. I guess the table here where I'm listening these were the older generations, so this is all new terms to us, and we're getting dizzy from learning all of these things, but it's frankly very educational for us. And I'm sure the question is, will I remember my questions during the Q&A? Anyway, we will now go to the fourth speaker. So we're rounding it up again. The last speaker of the day actually needs the introduction. He was already referred to also by the governor earlier. Talking about legal challenges facing the cryptocurrency market, our speaker, SEC Commissioner Ephyro Amatong, or F as I call him, was appointed as commissioner in 2014. He's currently the supervising commissioner for the Market and Securities Regulation Department and the Economic and Research Training Department. Basically, in jest, if there's anything on the market or the capital market relating to the SEC, he's the go-to guy. Before joining the SEC, F has had many positions, including being Assistant Secretary for the Department of Finance. He had so many deals, I will just not anymore list them anymore, because then I will eat up his talking space. He also had many capabilities in the government, including being the Vice President for PDIC, Corporate Staff Officer for the National Power Corporation, Acting Chair for Local Water Utilities Administration, or LUA. So even from digital to water utilities, he's done that in there. Legal Counsel and Assistant for PNOC Exploration, Advisor to Ambassador Hilario David Jr. for the permanent mission of the Philippines to the UN, Senior Law Clerk to Justice Conchita Carpio Morales of the Supreme Court. And he was also an associate when he started out with the Villarasa and Angkor Law Office as the firm. So we dealt with very high-profile cases. Of course, he has his master's in law degree, international finance concentration from the Harvard School, and also Bachelor of Laws from the UP College of Law. Again, another Diliman alum. Bachelor of Science degree from the UP School of Economics, where I guess Governor also took his economics. So ladies and gentlemen, the last speaker who will round it up, also with a very open mind, despite being the SEC Commissioner, but he has an open mind, ladies and gentlemen. Commissioner F. Amatong.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're still awake. I'm gonna try to maintain your energy level. I just like to say to Ed, who's a very good colleague and co-worker in the financial markets. And I don't think it should be in spite of. I think SEC Commissioner should have an open mind for the market, and that's why we are supportive of SharePHIL, which has been a strong partner in capital market development here in the Philippines. And we are open, as the Governor mentioned earlier, to this strange new world of virtual currency.
So this presentation, first of all, I have to give a standard disclaimer. This reflects my own personal thinking, not necessarily the views and opinions of the Commission itself. So this is my thoughts on the challenges that are being posed by virtual currencies. But it's also an invitation to the people in the room, to our partners in SharePHIL, and to the other speakers and the other participants in this forum to help shape a regulatory framework that can adequately respond to these challenges, so that we as a nation can benefit from the positives behind virtual currencies and mitigate the risks. So that next slide, please. So we've been talking about cryptocurrency, virtual currency, electronic money. These are all terms that we are using very loosely, and I'm going to use the term virtual currency in my presentation, but it's a very loose description of these electronic programs. I think tokens has also been used. I have a personal preference for the term token because it's less loaded than the term currency, but I think everybody uses the term cryptocurrency or virtual currency. So let's unpack it for a bit for members of like myself who of an older generation who are non-millennial. So when you talk about electronic currencies, you talk about digital currencies, as the governor was implying a while ago, not necessarily means a virtual currency, doesn't necessarily mean a cryptocurrency. So if we unpack it, an electronic peso or a peso in electronic form, you can think of that as a digital currency. But when we talk about virtual currencies, as the governor was discussing earlier, we're talking about quote-unquote privately issued tokens or privately issued units of value that are not denominated in pesos. So what's an opposing example? So I think some of us will be familiar already with some electronic forms of money like GCash or Pasaload. You can pay certain things with your Pasaload or with your GCash or with your PayMaya account. All of those things are in a way electronic, computerized representations of money, but denominated in Philippine pesos. But we're talking about, when we talk about Bitcoin and the ICOs, these are privately issued representations of value. Let's just use the term electronic video games. There are electronic representations of value that you can buy electronic things with. For the older people in the room, chits, diba? Sometimes you walk into a hotel or a restaurant and you can make use of chits, not real money. But that's confined in that space. No? So one of the things that mark virtual currencies is that part of their goal is they are exchangeable for other things. You can use them to acquire other physical assets or other money. In the case of the example of remittance, you exchange your, let's say, real into virtual currency into peso. So it's convertible. Now, it may be decentralized or more centralized, as Nishal was discussing a while ago, and I'll also touch on that. So the crypto portion really comes from the use of cryptography to ensure the integrity of the virtual currency. So what does that mean in simpler terms? If you take out your wallet and you take out the peso, we are all aware that there are all mechanisms to ensure that it's not a fraudulent, it's not a forged peso bill. There are special watermarks, there are special printing instruments, there are special paper used to ensure the integrity of everyday fiat currency. Cryptography in the electronic world takes the place of those watermarks and digital. They ensure the integrity of the currency and the integrity of the transfers. So when they say crypto, they use cryptography or how would we define the cryptography? They use special rules to make it difficult to falsify the transfers of electronic currency. So those are different versions of different ways you can look at virtual currency. The one we're talking about today is really virtual currencies not denominated in fiat currency and convertible to other instruments. Next slide, please. So when you look at these virtual currencies, they're digital representations of value introduced by private individuals. And I think the key element for all of us here is the level of convertibility. So when people are discussing what is the value, and the governor had that concept of the paperclip. The paperclip is as valuable as what somebody else is willing to exchange it for. So when you look at the value of virtual currency, the question that should arise is, what can I buy with it? Or how much money is it equivalent to? Or will it be equivalent to? So the level of convertibility. Now underneath that, for technical people, for technologists and for regulators, there's an underlying payment and settlement system. It's, as Nix was describing, Bitcoin is a distributed ledger. So there's a mechanism by which I can transfer electronically my virtual currency to you. And that mechanism of transfer implies some kind of payment and settlement system within the program itself. So next slide, please. So one of the questions that have come up already is virtual currency money? And you can bring it, you can cut up that question into two stages. Does it satisfy the legal definition of money? And does it perform the economic role of money? So the first question is the easy one to answer. As has been extensively discussed today, virtual currencies are not legal tender. And in that sense, they do not satisfy the legal definition of money. What is legal tender? So essentially, in the Philippines, you are required to accept pesos as a means of payment by law. So that's part of where the fiat or the order comes from. By law, if I'm selling mangoes in a stall and somebody tenders to me pesos, I cannot say, no, I want to be paid in dollars. Or no, I want to be paid in hopya. Or no, I want to be paid in something else. If I am offered pesos for goods or services that I offer to the public, I am required to accept it here in the Philippines. So that's the legal tender. And the issuance of that legal tender here in the Philippines is the domain of the central bank. So in this case, virtual currencies issued by private groups or individuals, okay, not by the central bank. No one can force you to accept Bitcoin as a payment. It's up to you, or up to the vendor, or up to that's okay with me. I'm willing to accept that as a payment. But if you should insist that I be paid in pesos for your goods or services, that's what you can do. You don't have to take the virtual currency. The second question is the more interesting one, and I think the earlier speakers touched on this already. In economics, and I know there are students in the room, so for the students, if you're going to get into this field, I would strongly suggest you take your money and banking course very seriously, Econ 121 in Diliman, because the economics behind virtual currencies mimic very much closely the concepts behind money. And in economics, money has three roles or three purposes. It's a store of value, it's a medium of exchange, and it's a unit of account. So it's a store of value. If I hold 500 pesos today, tomorrow it's still 500 pesos. It hasn't gone up, it hasn't gone down. I still have 500 pesos in my wallet. It's a medium of exchange. We were talking about what you can get for it. So I can exchange my 500 pesos for a sandwich or a drink or a good dinner or tickets to a movie. It's a medium of exchange and it's a unit of account. We denominate the cost or the price of things in Philippine pesos, at least here in the Philippines. So those are the functions of money. Next slide, please. So when you look at virtual currencies and you compare them to those functions, the big question and one of the challenges that arises is how well do virtual currencies perform those functions of money? Now, earlier my colleagues, the earlier speakers already were saying that to a certain extent, especially for a virtual currency like Bitcoin that has gained acceptance internationally, but perhaps not the same acceptance as a US dollar or a Japanese yen or a Chinese renminbi, there is some level of approximation of the three functions. Nevertheless, there are challenges. So when you say store of value, as I said, if I hold 500 pesos in my wallet or 1,000 pesos in my bank account, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, that's what I have in my bank account. But to the extent that there's volatility in the virtual currency market, the value goes up and the value goes down, there's a question mark as to, is it a store of value? Is the 1,000 pesos that I converted to Bitcoin still 1,000 pesos tomorrow? Is it higher or is it lower? Okay. There are certain effects created by the volatility. For a country like the Philippines, where remittance is a very important part of our economy, that's something that we're interested in. Next slide, please. There's also an appeal to distributed ledger technology because of the way the information is distributed and decentralized. You can think of it as your bank having not just one offsite backup or two offsite backups, but 11,000, not just backups, those are the original records kept. So that level of robustness is actually appealing to a regulator. Next slide, please. Again, there are a number of benefits that the technology that underlies or underpins virtual currencies and even virtual currencies themselves that appeal to regulators. Reconciliation through cryptography. The fact that the way the messages are coded or the way the transactions are coded ensures integrity of the transfer is appealing. I've already mentioned replication across institute. The program itself technologically not only stores a legal relationship or legal contract, but performs it itself. So in practical terms, instead of just offering you a bond and a piece of paper with a promise to pay a coupon payment of, let's say, 6% semi-annually, we could issue in digital or tokenized form the same kind of bond, which automatically transfers from my account to your account 6% semi-annually. So self-executing contracts embedded into the technology itself. That's another interesting feature that the technology promises. Next slide, please. 3 seconds to transfer money between the banks that make up the iRipple network in Japan, as opposed to what we have today in the Philippines if you want to transfer money through the banking system. Next slide, please. There are also other possible uses. So Michelle
touched on this, like solving the KYC problem through a distributed ledger where you have identification stored on a digital ledger of cost-effectively introducing new asset classes through what they would call tokenization, having a digital representation of existing assets. And the asset that you're always thinking about in the government is agriculture and agricultural produce. Is this a way, can digital tokenization result in an improvement over the trust receipts and the plans that we already feel familiar with today? Can that improve financing for agriculture? Next slide, please. So there are actually many implementations. These are just some of the technology that underpins the virtual currency, which is distributed ledger technology. I think both Nix and Michelle had even more examples. So my point here is really that although I spent a good deal of time talking about some of the risks involved when it comes to virtual currencies, and at the same time the technology underpinning virtual currencies, there are still a number of uses that we see as productive. Next slide, please. Having said that, aside from the conceptual issues that I raised earlier when we asked the question, are virtual currencies money or a substitute for money? Even the underlying technology raises questions for the regulators. So there are certain operational risks. I won't go through all of them, but let me describe some. So as was discussed, part of the appeal of a virtual currency transaction is that it's final and immutable. If I transfer a Bitcoin from my wallet to your wallet, I can't stop payment in the middle.
Just like on the other side of the world, let's say in Washington, D.C. What if I keyed in the wrong amount? How do I undo that? Okay. In a smart contract, what does the program fully encapsulate in technological form the legal relationship in a written contract? Or is there's something that we missed out and now we can't control what the smart contract is doing? What if there seems to be questions as to margin for error on the programming side. While the technology promises several things, how flexible is the technology to tweaking? Because we are aware in real life there are often many errors. And so on and so forth, no, when it comes to the technology that underpins. Next slide, please. So you've heard many countries have adopted different approaches, with the extreme approaches being, let's say, China and South Korea recently banning virtual currencies. Then you have Japan on the other side, which I understand they have ruled that virtual currencies are currencies. Or at least Bitcoin is a currency. So there are various approaches. But here in the Philippines, now we're facing the challenge of having, what's our approach? Next slide, please. So we're looking for balance. We're trying to mitigate the risk. As some of the other speakers have mentioned, these risks are already with us, just exacerbated somewhat by the lack of public understanding behind virtual currencies. But scammers have existed before, they exist today, they will exist into the future. But there is an increased risk to the extent that this is a new technology. People don't completely understand necessarily what they're being asked to invest in. And and the allure or the pull of the idea of making what was 1,000% return over a 24-hour period through the appreciation of ICO is something that is that can be very appealing and can override common sense. And that's really the concern of regulators such as myself. To help people just apply their common sense before they invest in one of these items. So, innovation versus investor protection, disruption, maybe by bringing costs down versus stability. The incumbent industry, which is already heavily regulated, versus this new market, new world of currency exchanges, which I think Nishal mentioned regulation would be useful in order to increase confidence, and then essentially benefits versus risks. So the SEC and the BSP and the Insurance Commission have been discussing these issues internally. We have been discussing these issues with our counterparts within the region and near the region. So Japan is a leader, China has taken its approach, Korea has taken its approach. There was a question a while ago if there was a regional discussion. ADB is actually hosting, as part of the ASEAN Plus 3 Bond Market Forum in June, a day on fintech and cryptocurrencies. So it's something that's being discussed. But what I would like personally is to discuss it with you, the investing public, and the technologists who are underpinning, who are pushing the boundaries of these new technologies, so that we can craft together a legal framework that can achieve this goal of balance. With that, I think the next thing will be panels. Thank you very much for your attention.